Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, this program is In the Zone. My name is Eric Schein, I'm the host, and my co-host is Edward Preston. He is the host on the program Voice of the People that is also aired on this network. And today we are privileged to have with us Ed Asner, actor and activist. Welcome, Ed.
Very nice to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So, many things to talk about, and I know you have one, well, first and foremost, I think most of America, if not the world, knows and understands your role as Lou Grant.
I kept trying to understand it myself, but it became a strange icon who convinced, once I went into our series, to convince a lot of young people out there, unbeknownst to me, to go into the world of journalism. Now, when I was in my journalism class in high school, my professor came up to me one day, says, "Are you thinking of going into journalism?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." He says, "I wouldn't." I said, "Why not?" He said, "You can't make a living." And as we now see with corporate control of journalism throughout this country of ours and the inability to speak other than corporate control, there is no real journalism going on for the most part other than blogs and the internet, and even that can be suspect at times. So don't blame me for going into journalism.
No, not at all.
And Edward did share that before the program that you were.
Yeah, it was a motivating factor for me to pursue journalism.
It's a great and noble pursuit. Unfortunately, there's too much to trip you up along the way.
Right. That's where alternative media, such as this show, provides the counterpoint to mainstream media.
And thank God for it. And I'm waiting to see what controls and creations are arrived at to block you and to block all the others out there who are giving us the alternative news and the alternative press.
Oh, and there are moves afoot. I mean, many people have talked about taking down the internet, controls on the internet, controls on bloggers, controls on, instead of opening things up so that more people can join the fray and more voices can be heard.
And as clever as they are, that magnificent, vaporous they're still not smart enough to have moved fast enough to shut you up.
But give them time.
Oh, I am. I don't want to give them time.
Well, we have this half hour, so let's get into some serious issues. One, you're very familiar with what's going on at Walter Reed. The
toured there about 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago.
And what did you see?
I didn't see the roaches and the rats. I didn't go into those domiciles. We visited the wounded veterans, and I was never more impressed, because I am so anti this war,
right,
that I was amazed at how impressive these young people were, how bereft I felt at what had been done to them serving this cause. And it was a strange dichotomy, this feeling I had for them and my hatred for the war.
Can you speak a little bit about your hatred for the war?
Well, it's a totally unjust war. It's built totally on lies, and money. And I am just totally awestruck, dumbstruck that no politicians, or so few, maybe Russ Feingold we can look at and hope for the best, but that this mass of politicians has allowed this creature, George Bush, to run roughshod over the Constitution and this country. And that's what I feel about this war.
Oh, and that he has done. I mean, the Military Commissions Act, the Patriot Act, creation of Homeland Security to where it is now our quote-unquote Defense Department, and our Defense Department has now become the Department of War, much like in World War II.
Yeah, yeah. And what a wonderful, what is it, the George Orwell, 84.
1984.
Yeah, the changing the Department of War to the Department of Defense. And of course, the Department of Defense had a lot to do with an invasion of Iraq.
And not just this time.
No.
Because we never even really left. I mean, we had the no-fly zones in the north. We were still in that country after the first President Bush.
Oh, sure. Clinton and what's his name from England, Tony Blair. Were bombing the hell out of the no-fly zone, and there was speculation that maybe 500,000 Iraqis died during those 5 years of bombing. I don't know.
Well, one thing that's very important too, and this goes to issues of like depleted uranium and some of the weapons that are now being used, is that if we first and foremost even stop the war and begin to treat our own, we're also required under the Geneva Conventions and international law and our own laws to treat the other side. And that is something that this administration and these corporatists will not have.
Oh, that will certainly bankrupt us, just paying for those medical bills. And nobody's really talked about depleted uranium. It's kept secret. It's controlled, the information on that, just as the information on 9/11 has certainly been highly sat on and circumscribed.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I am once again aghast at the way this country has accepted the 9/11 Commission, the way it has discredited or attempted to discredit all of the naysayers as to what occurred in terms of the collapse of the buildings, that it certainly looked like implosions in terms of the Twin Towers, that it's impossible to imagine an airliner making an 18-foot hole in the Pentagon.
And not leaving fuselage or seats or cushions or bodies or a nose of the plane or engines or anything else.
No. We don't show the dead in Iraq, and we don't show the carnage and the wreckage. The steel was shipped out immediately to China from the Twin Towers.
Or even hidden in wrecking yards here in the United States, because it's popping up in different places.
And I'm not even sure what the final resting place of Flight 93 was. Are you?
No.
I think there's a choice of 3. It's a multiple choice test. So but the American people don't like to question.
Well, see, and the question is, it sounds like you don't necessarily have a strong opinion as to what happened, but you do have a lot of questions as to...
I have many questions. No heads rolled from 9/11. Now, with the phenomenal porousness that the United States exhibited in its defense,
well, no,
I mean, they're victimizing this general who took over 3 months ago at Walter Reed,
and putting the guy back in charge who was in charge of it for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then, but worse, with NORAD in the stand down, it's very clear when they had a war game, and this is in the 911 Commission report, Keenan Hamilton, it goes into the fact that there were war games going on the very same day that mirrored exactly what happened.
Our planes were busy that day playing the games.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the destruction of air traffic control tapes, they did that. All of the cameras, say at the 7-Elevens, etc., around the Pentagon were immediately sequestered. Why all this secrecy? And then like a month or 2 ago, the Pentagon put out a picture of the plane going in. You couldn't see what the hell it was.
No. And then they put out another picture or video, a very short one, from another vantage point. And if you look at it and compare and know a little bit about physics and even the size of the plane, the amount of fuel that was on board, it looked much more like a cruise missile or some other small Global Hawk or whatever hitting the side of the building. Because it just was poof and went straight up.
Well, I won't go so far as to accuse the administration of setting this up, but I will go so far as they're not moving anywhere. I mean, to compare with that Bakakta movie that was made for ABC, to compare Clinton's malfeasance.
You don't even want to use the name.
Clinton's malfeasance with Bush's malfeasance is a crime in itself. to put that on national TV and have Governor Kane afterwards, this great moderate Republican, say he thought it was a pretty good movie.
Yeah. Well, and Giuliani's come out and he's actually testified in the case against, I'm not sure if it was Otta or the one who was tried in New York, the supposed terrorist. I don't know if it was the Dirty Bomber, but Giuliani came in as a, not necessarily a character witness, but spoke of all the horrors that went on in New York, you know, as if he was the, I guess, end-all be-all of, and I mean, more appropriately, some of the victims, whether they be firemen, policemen, widows, family members, they're all being quashed and they're not being allowed to speak, especially if they took any kind of payout on the 911 fund.
Well, we've had conspiracy theories going back to certainly the Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, the Robert Kennedy assassination, and there may be some credence to all of them. But the enormity of the government's dissipating and any true investigation, any true creation, timeline, etc., explanation for what happened. I've never seen a government so corrupt in its presentation of those facts.
Or ability to even ask itself a honest question. And get proper answers. Yeah. I real quick, I want to go, but so we make sure we get this in. But you wanted to speak about Sean Hughes's project.
Sean Hughes is an Iraq War veteran who I've become friends with. He's a wonderful actor. He's written a wonderful play called Sandstorm, which he's been performing around the country with a group of fellow Iraqi. He has set up this play group inviting all and any Iraq and Afghani veterans to come act and write these plays. They've set up this wonderful group with Bobby Moresco, a champion producer of Crash and a number of other films affiliated with Paul Haggis. I think he's also producing The Black Donnellys, along with Mark Harris. Joe Mantegna is going to be reading the scripts.
Wow.
Leslie Ann Warren. They've got some wonderful people there, and they are putting out this need for donations and for contributions from returning veterans to come join and go through this phenomenal cleansing experience, if nothing else, but see what you can write about, see what you can testify to by your writings, see what you can perform by what you may do that others have done.
Well, this is really to get out their own individual stories from their own individual voice of what they've experienced, so that hopefully, you know, God forbid that we shut this down, stop it before it gets worse, before we go into Iran. You know, I'm afraid of what's going on right now, because it appears to be history repeating itself, and not in a good way.
Oh, but they're improving on the repeat very handily. The numbers are much bigger, the stakes are much bigger, and question authority is the best bumper sticker I ever came across.
Yep, I appreciate that too. Edward, sorry.
What is your opinion about entertainment industry's responsibility in the promotion of the U.S. government agendas? An example would be like the films or documentaries that you see like on the History Channel that promote strongly the administration's course of action, where they tend to, in essence, dehumanize perhaps the soon-to-be like Iranians, or
even like you brought up Flight 93. You know, where it, and I hate to use the word propaganda.
They skew or alter the facts in a certain way,
or pay for it.
I have watched the History Channel. I'm not equipped to say, because I'm not a regular watcher, as to be aware of their spouting the government line. I had some friends make up a documentary on volunteers in the Army the other day. They wanted me to narrate. And I looked at it, and it was nothing but a puff film of propaganda film to join the service. I saw none of the tears. I saw none of the recriminations. I saw none of the horrors of the reality of. I'm just talking about recruits in basic, of the abasement and the debasement that goes on to make them into the killers they want them to be. I saw none of that. I said, I wouldn't do this.
Well, you've heard of Armstrong Williams and some of the other ones that were actually getting paid by the administration to not only do stories overseas for literal propaganda to quote unquote win the hearts and minds or win the war, but to affect what is going on here and actually get people to join what I like to call the war party.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we're in a country where 8 prosecutors who were appointed by Republicans have been kicked out of the Justice Department, and the Senate, the Democrats in the Senate are doing a pretty fair job of investigating it, but 6, at least 6, had admirable ratings and reports, and it's never happened before. Where are the people who are saying, how can you do this? Why are you doing this?
Well, and whistleblowers, I mean, whether you look at Colleen Rowley or Daniel Ellsberg, they're doing the same games they did to him, but on a much wider, broader program to where they're breaking in. They broke into the psychiatrist's office, stole his medical records, and wanted to see what kind of dirt they could dig up.
But they were made to pay. They were made to pay.
True.
Ellsberg was clever enough and intelligent enough, and the forces of justice we had in this country at that time were strong enough to override the government and punish the government for those intrusions into Ellsberg's life. We don't have that now.
Well, not necessarily to punish the government, to punish the individuals and change the government like FISA to where we have a system. So, okay, we need this because of foreign intelligence, foreign terrorists. Well, we have this court, and this is how you're going to do it to protect, most importantly, the Constitution, because protecting the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence also, and the Bill of Rights and all the statutes that come therefrom, protects all of us.
And as is, you say FISA, and it's never been shown, but the speculation is that any time they even went to FISA, they'd get an okay.
I think there was one time that they didn't.
Yeah.
And most of them, too, they can do it after the fact, like 72 hours, I believe. They'd actually even changed it to increase, I think it was up to 2 weeks, meaning they could start to tail, gather information, but then they had to go in and say why they were doing it, show it to the court, and the court would say, look, stop now, redress it.
Right. You're dealing with a president, if you want to call him that, because it tends to dishonor all those who preceded him. A president who has done more presidential signings than all the other presidents who ever preceded him. And presidential signing means that if a Congress passes a law and he doesn't like it, no matter the fact that it's passed, or he may even sign it, but when he wishes, he can totally ignore it.
Well, he's even coming out like on the Bacon-Davis Act that had been in force in effect for decades and saying that it doesn't matter anymore, it doesn't apply, so that federal contractors could take what they're contracted to provide up here and instead provide down here and take that slice of pie in between and put it in their own pocket, which they are ethically and legally not allowed to do.
Oh, yeah. Ethically and legally. What a laugh.
Right. Well, that's been kind of thrown out the window for quite some time now.
Ethics.
Yeah. Well, and how old is that text? Ethics, and even Plato's The Republic, several thousand years old, and we still have not learned, because at some point what is going on is, and even the Bible speaks of this, and to some extent it's also, and I'm not a Bible thumper, but to some extent it speaks about the creation of civilizations and the destruction. And it just doesn't happen. This is being orchestrated from within.
There ain't no higher being orchestrated, no matter how much George Bush may give him credit. I think it's all George and his feeders who create this unbelievably corrupt mess. And my God, can you imagine, let's say a Democrat runs, whoever it may be, would you want to be that Democrat? And look at the enormous mess that I think is going to be impossible to clean up for any one individual who gets elected president. I don't see how it can be done.
I think they've done that intentionally. They want to break the government. They want to take deregulation, not just past, ERISA and all the things that Reagan did, like even the tax upon PATCO and more, but back to all the way through all the amendments beyond the Constitution, beyond the Declaration of Independence, and even GWB has shown his fealty to the Queen of England and said, English is the tongue of the United States. Mm-hmm. And his father, I believe, has also been knighted. And so you start to think about some of those things, and it may be like cool and chic, but he's been knighted by the Queen. Mm-hmm. And you start to look at what's going on, and it is about the dissolution of our country from within, and individuals both in corporate and governmental positions of power and trust who are carrying this on intentionally.
I know. And I don't know how it would come. I just hope that I'm not the Democrat that they elect.
I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to you to be a patriotic American?
Well, there's a beautiful thing called the Constitution, which has been trampled on and spat upon and crapped upon. I have spent most of my life considering myself a liberal, and yet saying no matter what kind of liberal I may be regarded as, I've always thought that no matter how many crimes we may do in this country, if you want to go back to Smedley Butler and read his indictment of this country, that we were still better than anybody else. We still had that inkling, that little edge that I thought made us a little more godly, a little more
we at least try to take the higher road.
Freedom lovers, a little less shit decorating our uniforms. I think that this administration has finally brought us down to ground level, to ground zero, and has made us as dirty as anybody else you can find because of its actions and our killing factor.
Well, as a follow-up question then, where do you see America headed, and what as Americans can we do about it?
Well, you asked me about being an American. What do I feel about America? There was a beginning in the 06 election, people wanting to see change. Now, perhaps they wanted to see change because it was getting humdrum and boring for them. Or maybe they were part of that huge host of the poor that have been increased since this administration came into being. Maybe the ill treatment, what could happen to them that happened in New Orleans, they could envision happening to them. They saw no bright future. We're seeing now the collapse of the stock market in the past week, and God knows what next Monday will bring. So that no matter how fine the stock market is doing, the disenfranchised are increasing at too rapid a rate, and the very rich are getting very richer. I see a force that needs to be brought in, and the tools of America are there to bring in that force, to bring in a reining in of corporate control, to bring in a greater dissemination in terms of freedom of the press, to bring in greater protection of whistleblowers, to create an intensive pulling back of foreign engagements. We have 137 bases throughout the world. We control the world now by those bases. We can instantly strike if we ever had the men. We count on our machines to do that. And Iraq has taught us that very valuable lesson. I don't know what lesson George Bush has learned from Iraq, but it's taught us that you can't bomb the hell out of a country and expect to control it. You got to put men on the ground there. If you expect to see anybody alive, to control those people left alive, we need troops, and they better be well armed and well protected to have them there. So I see.
But we really have no business being in Iraq.
Of course not. No, I mean that's totally false, totally specious.
Right, and now they're looking at Iran, and at some point it's like they want to.
But my friend, there was a great, tremendous buildup for all of this. There are questions about even Korea. There certainly are enormous questions about Vietnam.
Right.
There certainly are questions about Grenada and the Russians landing big
Panama
planes
and
there.
Honduras,
Panama.
Guatemala.
That was a precursor. Turning in Noriega was a precursor for turning in Saddam Hussein. That was the initial. That was the first act. Saddam Hussein was the second act.
How many countries have we attacked around the world? I mean,
Where does the list stop?
right.
And Reagan, of course, talking about Nicaraguans invading the U.S. It was only a 2-day drive from Brownsville, Texas, and we were supposed to think, hey, those coffee growers could come storming up here
Yeah,
anytime.
right.
Yeah.
Just like Iraq could invade our country, and
Yeah, impending threat and doom.
And Condoleezza talking about, you wait for the mushroom cloud. But there's no act two to any mushroom cloud Saddam could have put up.
any rays of hope?
I don't have much. No, I
You
don't.
said the tools are here. I mean, really, we are the ones.
Unless our people wake up and try to think, what is it truly to be an American, and stop worrying about Mexicans crossing the border, why the Mexicans would want to cross the border. Things must really be rotten down there for them to want to come here and hope to make a living.
True. And we're doing nothing. I mean, we've set up this whole paradigm, and our own country uses immigration to attack.
It's another whipping. What do you call it? Dog.
Yeah.
It's a mislead. It's always a
Misdirection,
mislead.
redirection.
Yeah, look to the foreigner. Always find the
Well,
foreigner.
and
if you can't find the foreigner, then find the Jew in your midst.
Yeah, right.
Well, Hitler used that tactic very effectively.
Of course he did.
It's to demonize and dehumanize. And sadly to say, here in the U.S., when they were establishing and expanding westward, what did they do with the Indians? It's the same game. Different people by label are playing it, but it's
Well,
worked
now-
before, so they recycle the same games over and over.
And now you and I and Edward and everyone else have become the indigenous people, born and raised or emigrated here, and now they want to replace us. And they want to sell off all of our inalienable rights to others.
Yes, they certainly do. They certainly do. And there's some good cases coming up before the Supreme Court. I can't enumerate them right now, but I think that they will. I think the Guantanamo thing is going to really come to a head in the next year with the Supreme Court. And let's see what these two fine new additions to the Supreme Court will give us.
Question, history written by the victors?
Oh, always, always. Well, I mean, I'm going back to my earlier thing. Thinking about America and its lack of bloodshed, America has a bloody history. It talks about the Indians, talks about the Civil War. What are you gesturing?
We're getting to the end.
Talking about Civil War. There was a book there, and California certainly was regarded as a fairly benevolent place. There was a book came out, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, talked about bloody California, where Los Angeles itself had Chinese ghettos. And finally, some of the white guys decided to, really knock the hell out of the Chinese. They went into the ghettos and they killed right and left, raped the women,
Right.
and the town marshals stood at the gateways to the ghetto and drove any Chinese trying to get out back in. So, I mean, that's what we don't hear enough about in terms of our checkered history.
Wow. With that, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Think nothing of it.
That's the program.
You
In
may
the
never
Zone.
see me again.
No, I hope we do, and I hope we hear a lot more from you, because people like you need to be heard on a regular basis, and I appreciate you standing up and speaking out.
Thank you.
All right.